Well, hello and welcome. This is video 3 of 5 in a series on the Renaissance. So if this is your first time joining me, welcome. Today we're going to focus on Renaissance art. Now, what I'm going to emphasize in my video today are some characteristics of Renaissance art to help you be able to identify art as either from the Renaissance era or possibly before that period. It would be excellent if you would also view another video and another series of videos that'll be created that'll have some examples of Renaissance art with a little more information about each of them. But for today and for this video, I'm going to keep it really pretty simple and just identify some characteristics of Renaissance art. So with that, we're going to simply start with subject matter. And as I've done with some of the presentation material we've gone through, I've got some basically compare and contrast between what was true before the Renaissance compared to what is true with the Renaissance. And so with subject matter, on this slide, you can see an example of a pre-Renaissance painting and the subject matter that would be consistently found in a pre-Renaissance painting. With this one, you can see that this is a scene that has Mary and Jesus placed prominently in the center of the painting with angels and saints surrounding very clearly a religious scene that's being depicted. And in the years before the Renaissance, if you looked at a painting, if you looked at any kind of sculpture or anything like that, you would always find religious scenes, whatever they might be. And this, of course, made sense because at the time, before the Renaissance, exclusively it was the Roman Catholic Church that was hiring artists to paint and sculpt and do those types of things. Now, when you get to the Renaissance years, you begin to see some things change. Now, one thing that doesn't actually change is that the Catholic Church did continue to support artists, so you did continue to see religious paintings and religious sculptures and things like that. But what you began to see that wasn't true before is paintings and sculptures about anything else. And that was because other people started to fund and support artists, and they didn't necessarily want a religious scene made, for example. So families like the Medici started to fund artists. Now, the picture I've placed on this slide is from an artist named Raphael. It's called School of Athens. This one was painted about 200 years after the picture I just showed you. And what this is very much not a religious scene. And in fact, what it actually is a scene that has a lot of people being painted in who were a part of those classical civilizations that were a big part of the inspiration for the Renaissance. You've got actually right in the middle, Plato and Aristotle painted. As you learn more about the painting, you'll be able to identify a variety of other people, mathematicians. In fact, Raphael, the painter himself, is in there. So basically just a painting that in a lot of ways kind of speaks to the inspiration of the Renaissance. And if nothing else, you can tell it's not a religious painting, which is something you started to see during the Renaissance years. Now, another area to address with Renaissance art that is important is the concept of portraits. On the left, you can see a painting, just a scene being painted. It's got many different people in it. It is a religious scene. It's not a portrait. It's not of an individual. It doesn't emphasize an individual by placing only one person in the scene. It is just a painting with many people in it. You didn't see individual portraits made in the pre-Renaissance years, and that was largely due to how the human body was viewed at the time. In the years before the Renaissance, with the Catholic Church being a dominant force in society in Europe, basically the key thing that the Church emphasized was salvation, and that's the only thing that people should really be focused on and concerned about, and that the view was the body was an obstacle to being able to achieve salvation. So the last thing that they wanted to do was anything that would single it out or glorify it or give attention to it. Now you get into the Renaissance years and the viewpoint really begins to change. It's not that people were no longer interested in salvation or no longer valued salvation after they died. That was still very important to most people. But through the humanist movement and the emphasis on achievement and basically just getting the most out of things, the human body started to be viewed as a positive thing, as a good thing. Something worthy of attention and worthy of being glorified. So one of the things you begin to see with that change in perspective is the use of portraits. And so if you look at the picture on the right there, that's a depiction of, or not depiction, that is a picture of the Mona Lisa, probably one of the most famous paintings in the world. And one thing that it is that's very characteristic of the Renaissance is it is a portrait. And so one thing that you can definitely know if you're looking at art that you know is from years and years ago, if it is a portrait, you can know that that was done at least sometime during the Renaissance or later, because you just simply wouldn't have seen a portrait before that time. Right, and then the last thing that we'll speak to on characteristics of art and how they were changing would be style. And what I have on the screen right here is a depiction of pre-Renaissance style. And the key thing to speak to here is that what they did wasn't particularly realistic. The painting here is a depiction of the Last Supper, a religious scene from the very early 1300s, so right at the beginning edge of when you might say the Renaissance would have started to happen. So this was still done in the style of the pre-Renaissance. And what you can see is when you look at the picture, you can tell what's going on, especially if you're familiar with the story. But you can also tell that nothing has really been done to make it look like it was like if you were looking at a photograph, or that you were truly physically looking at the scene. And so what you really got during the pre-Renaissance time was not really an attempt to make things look real, but rather to capture the spiritual ideal of the scene. And so when you look at this, you can understand what's going on, and that would have really been what the artist was trying to convey. No effort to make things look realistic. Whether it's particularly nice or not, I sometimes jokingly say, in the pre-Renaissance time, it looked more like little kids did it. And then when you get to the Renaissance years, it begins to look a little more grown up. And I think you can see that here with this next depiction of the same scene, just by a different artist during the Renaissance years, because this is also a depiction of the Last Supper, this one by Leonardo da Vinci at the very end of the 1400s. And again, if you're familiar with the scene, you very much know what's going on. But the way this one was put together, it definitely does look more like as if you were standing in front of this scene and either were looking at it or taking a photograph of it, that there are steps taken to make this look more realistic. Perspective is used to try to add dimension to the space. The objects and the portions of the room that are closer to the viewer appear to be bigger. They appear to get smaller as they go away, just as is true in real life or when looking at a picture. And so you begin to see a lot more of that with Renaissance art, and moving forward is an attempt to be realistic. So in some ways you could say the art and the technique became more scientific. Doesn't necessarily mean it was better, but it was definitely different. So depending on what you're interested in, if you like things that are more realistic, you would probably take a greater interest in Renaissance art, for example, than art before that time. Now that's where I'm going to leave it for today. Just wanted to highlight some of those key changes to art. So again, I would encourage you to also check out the series of videos that I'll have available for you, where several pieces of Renaissance art will be highlighted. And one of the nice things that's going to accompany those images is you'll be able to hear from a couple of different experts as they talk about the paintings, get a little bit more into what they're about, the symbolism, things like that, so that hopefully it'll give you a stronger sense of what some of this Renaissance art was about, and also what it looked like. So we'll leave it here. Thanks.